Guys, this is Ben, and we're going to go and he's talking about aerobic capacity today. I'm excited to hear this.
Okay guys, let's go. So, aerobic capacity. Aerobic capacity is one component of CrossFit that we talk about quite a lot, but it's heavily understudied and heavily understood as well. There is a CrossFit specialist course on it, which I'm keen on doing at some point, but unfortunately it's not available in the UK just yet. So I've done a little bit of research and I just want to talk about it now, just to give you a little bit of a flavour of what my understanding of aerobic capacity is. So, what does CrossFit believe aerobic capacity is? So, first of all, I'm going to talk about what aerobic capacity is for me. So when we talk about aerobic capacity, we're talking about the cardiovascular system. So that's the heart and the lungs and how they work together to provide a source of oxygen to our body, to our muscles when we start working. Aerobic capacity can be measured through something that's called VO2 max. What VO2 max is it's a metric of how much oxygen our body is using when we're working at maximum exertion. So the way that we quantify that is in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass in 1 minute. So it's a time metric of how much oxygen our muscles are using in a space of 1 minute. The higher the VO2 max in an individual, the higher the anaerobic threshold. So what that means is that the higher your VO2 max is, the more work you can do per minute before you enter anaerobic, before you cross the anaerobic threshold. The anaerobic threshold is the point at which our body starts to produce more lactic acid than we can remove, and it's an inefficient way of working for longer periods of time. So we can produce more power in an anaerobic state for a short period of time, but it's not sustainable. CrossFit's cardiovascular endurance is one of its 10 physical skills. It's fairly interchangeable with aerobic capacity, so when we talk about our aerobic capacity, we can also sort of consider that to be one of the 10 physical skills, which CrossFit refers to as cardiovascular endurance. So, what does an increased aerobic capacity lend itself to? So, when we talk about physiological adaptations, what that means is how our body changes as we increase our exercise volume. So, as you begin to work out more, one of the things that lends itself to aerobic capacity is our VO2 max. So that's, as we begin to exercise more, we can uptake more oxygen through our lungs and supply our muscles with more of the oxygen. Everyone has a predetermined VO2 max. It's genetic. We all have, so there's a ceiling effect. So everyone has a VO2 max that sits, and we can't get higher than that. The average VO2 max value for most people sits around about 50 to 60 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram body mass per minute. But people's tend to be a lot lower than their potential because they're not fit, and there are also genetic and age factors into that. So as you get older, your potential VO2 max also starts to decrease.
It starts dropping.
Yeah. The next physiological adaptation is increased lactate threshold. So the lactate threshold, as I was talking about earlier, I was talking about the anaerobic threshold. Your lactate threshold is the point at which the amount of lactic acid in your muscles exceeds the ability of our body to filter it out again. So when we're exercising, we all have a certain level of lactic acid in our body, but our body uses that lactic acid to produce energy. So it's there, but we're able to use it efficiently. As you begin to work harder in a workout and your blood, your heart rate increases, your breathing gets harder, you produce more lactic acid and our body can't extract it anymore. This point at which it becomes inefficient, we produce too much lactic acid and we can't filter it out. It's called the lactate threshold. The more we develop our aerobic capacity through specific workouts, the higher this lactate threshold gets. And as your VO2 max increases, your lactate threshold also increases until the point that the difference between them is quite small. So basically, the more you train your aerobic capacity, the higher your lactate threshold gets and the smaller the difference between your VO2 max and your lactate threshold. The last physiological adaptation to exercise concerning aerobic capacity is increased metabolic efficiency. So we have three metabolic pathways which CrossFit likes to make sure everyone understands. The first one is the oxidative pathway, which is otherwise known as the aerobic pathway. This is low-level exercise. It's sustainable. If you run slow enough, you can run all day because you're using your oxidative pathway. The next one is the lactate pathway, or the glycolytic pathway, which is for sort of medium intensity, up to about 70% of your max aerobic capacity output, which is the one which we tend to use a lot when we're doing shorter WODs. And the final one is the phosphogenic pathway, which is for very, very short bursts of really intense exercise, like a 1 rep max squat or a 100-meter dash or sprint. So what happens when we develop our aerobic capacity with regards to this metabolic efficiency? So first of all, we have increased mitochondrial size. The mitochondria is a organelle inside our cell. An organelle is just like it's a very small component of the way our cells work. And these produce ATP, which is, think of ATP as fuel for exercise. It's what our bodies run on. It's a molecule. And as our aerobic capacity increases, the density and the size and the number and recruitment of these mitochondria increase, which allows us to recruit more ATP and work harder. The myoglobin content of our blood increases. Myoglobin is a protein that is used in blood, and it's a component of hemoglobin. It's the way that our body recruits and moves oxygen through our blood. This in turn increases our oxidative capability. What that means is that we can use our oxidative pathway for longer, so we can run for longer or we can row for longer. And finally, we have increased glycogen storage capability, which means that our muscles can have a higher capacity to store glycogen, which is what we use. When we store energy, we store it in our muscles, and it's stored in glycogen. Okay, so how do we improve our aerobic capacity?
And what we can do, Ben, is we can also post this up, as in like we can edit this.
Yeah.
So we can stuff it through.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go. So.
Okay, cool. So, how do we improve our various different components, which I've run through the first two already? I'll run through these next two now. So, how do we improve our lactate threshold? Basically, grunt work is the way to improve your lactate threshold. So, higher volume workouts, longer distance intervals at threshold intensities, which means when I say threshold, I mean at lactate threshold. So this is super maximal work. So legs.
How often can you do that? Like relatively?
You can't do it often.
You can't do it often, no.
Because you don't give your body a chance to adapt.
So what, once a week, thereabouts? Is that roughly what they say?
A good workout, which I was watching a video about yesterday, is this workout from the Dubai Fitness Championships in January this year called Acid Bath. And it's 500 meters ski erg, 500 meters.
Do you want to write it down?
Rowing.
Put it on the board?
Yeah, so
what's it? 500 meter?
500 meter ski.
Yeah. Oh, nice, okay.
500 meters row.
Yep.
And then it's 1,000 meters.
Run.
No, it's so it's a
bike.
A bike.
Yeah.
It's not an assault bike.
It's the CrossFit bike.
It's
isn't
the
it?
CrossFit bike.
The Concept 2 bike, but they may as well call it the CrossFit bike.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So what? Just that's the time, or for rounds?
It's one. It's just this. So it's Matt Fraser did it in like 4.5 minutes. So
4.5 minutes.
Yeah. So the idea is that you push yourself right up to above your threshold, so you're above your lactate threshold. So everything hurts. Suddenly your legs are just filled with acid, and you just keep going. You just keep going. You grit. You go into your happy place. You try to imagine you're not in the pain cave and you just go for it.
I love it.
This is super maximal lactate threshold training. It's just sitting above where you're comfortable, so you're uncomfortable, you're sitting above your threshold, and you just force your body to adapt. You can only do this a couple times a week. You don't want to do this every day.
Or maybe once a week.
You're gonna overload your body.
Yeah, once. I mean, it's mentally as well. It's quite trying, isn't it? Because something like that, where you're like, it's just gonna hurt.
So
if
we were talking to JJ from Thrivesty.
Yeah.
This is a mental toughness workout. I don't know if you agree with me. I think this is pretty mental.
Mental. Well, it's,
But
it's probably competition. So that would be.
Stick to it.
Yeah, so that would be a competition workout, wouldn't it? So I like that. I mean, maybe JJ, if you watch this, here's an idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So next thing.
It's basically suffer for 2 minutes, then change your exercise, suffer for another 2 minutes, and then suffer for another 2 minutes. It's
Yeah.
like 6 minute workout, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. For
Yeah.
mortals.
Yeah. For mortals, 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the next bit?
So-
VO2 max.
How do you
So
improve our VO2 max? So
lower volume workouts.
Yeah.
Shorter
So lower-
distances and higher intensities, more rep sets.
yeah.
Okay.
So the idea with this is that we're not doing a huge amount of work, but we're working much harder. And we want longer rests. So the difference is with the lactate threshold, we're not giving ourselves a lot of rest because otherwise you're going to let your body drop below the lactate threshold again.
Yeah.
You want to stay, you want to hit that zone and stay in it. With the VO2 max, we want to drop back below the zone and drop back below our lactate threshold. Give ourselves a bit of a chance, shake your legs off, let all that acid flush out, and then go again.
Okay. So that's what VO2 max is, basically shorter distances,
Yeah.
higher intent, so like 100% or 90% efforts, and then rest, and
Yeah.
then you do 3 or 4 times or 5, 6 times, yeah, something like that. Okay, and then speed endurance.
So speed endurance is, so the last two, speed and strength endurance, are two
very low volume.
different but quite similar types of training. Speed endurance is just for things like running, rowing, cycling.
Okay.
We're working on
Less than
distances.
60 seconds.
So the idea is that both of these are developing fast twitch muscle fibers, but strength is working like more like WOD type of movements, so lifting heavy weights, long distances quickly. Speed endurance is more like technical sprints, technical rowing. It's more like trying to increase. This is more like sport. This is more like weightlifting. Throwing.
So speed is more like sport, speed endurance is more like
So-
sport, strength is more like weightlifting.
Yeah. So
Okay.
let's say you have an athlete who is a runner. They compete in. Let's say they're still at high school. They're a track and field sort of person, or they're a track person. They want to get faster. They've come to a CrossFit gym and they're saying, as well as working on my strength, I want to keep building my speed. Have you got a program for me? This is the sort of thing that you'd use as a template to prescribe them a speed endurance program.
So they want to preserve strength but also develop more speed.
Yeah, so obviously.
So short distance intervals basically, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the CrossFit model, isn't it?
It
Really?
is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. These two things are interchangeable. It's just this is focusing on weight. The other one's focusing on distance and speed.
Okay, cool. I like it. All right. Let's go next.
Right.
Okay, lots of numbers on this one.
There we go. Okay.
Oh, okay. Training with heart rate.
Training with heart rate. So this is where we're getting a bit technical now. Not everyone has or wants access to heart rate monitors. They're really useful tools, but you have to know how to use them. You have to know how to use them. There's no point buying it. They're cheap, but there's no point having a heart rate monitor unless you know how to use them. So this is a heuristic. It's a rule of thumb of how to establish your training zones. Training zones are different zones of heart rates where we can roughly establish how our body is working. So to establish your heart rate max, so this is your max heart rate. A rule of thumb of how to establish this is 220 minus your age. So I'm 22, so theoretically my max heart rate is 198 beats per minute.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a couple of different factors in this. How fit you are at this point in time affects it. How much sleep you've had, how well you've been eating, how much stress, especially how much stress you're under, will alter your ability to achieve your potential max heart rate. But for the sake of this, let's say that my heart rate is 198 beats per minute. So the next step is establishing your heart rate reserve. The reserve is the difference between your max heart rate and your resting heart rate. So the best way to get an idea of your resting heart rate.
What's max minus resting?
So for this, my resting heart
that's
rate.
cool.
My resting heart rate is about 50 beats per minute. The way that you measure this is for 3 mornings in a row. As soon as you wake up, just measure your heart beat for a minute. The best way to do it is measure it for 10 seconds and then times that by 6, because when you sit and measure your heart rate for a minute, things like stress and discomfort start to kick in and you'll raise your heart rate. So the best way to do it is just take it for 10 seconds and multiply it by 6, or even better, 5, multiply it by 12. So
that would mean, like, so my theoretical max, I'm 30, so it'd be 190.
Yeah.
And then my resting heart rate is like 60.
Yeah.
Solid 60. So that puts me around 130 as like a reserve.
But this again is just a very rough rule of thumb, because you're fitting your heart rate, your resting heart rate. I mean, sorry, your max.
I've always had quite a high heart rate. Mine's always never doesn't really go much below 60.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That's good.
Anyway.
Okay. So
that's
your
cool.
Aerobic threshold. So when we're walking around, our heart rate raises to, let's say, so if my resting is 50, my heart rate when I'm walking around might raise to 80. But at 80 beats per minute, I'm doing very, very low level respiratory work. So I'm not breathing especially fast. I'm not really recruiting very many muscle fibers. I'm definitely not recruiting 100% of my mitochondrial capability. So the point at which we begin to consider ourselves aerobically working, so beginning to recruit, breathe heavier, is our threshold. And the way that we measure this is we take 50% of our reserve and we add our resting rate. So for me, that's 124.
So if you're working underneath 124, you can just go that all day.
You can do that all day. Once you hit 124, what happens is that we slowly begin to use our, we slowly begin to use our blood glycogen stores.
Yeah.
You can't do that all day. You would need to eat every half an hour roughly to sustain that.
So 50% of reserves. So in theory, so for me, 50% of reserves. That's reserve is what was it 130? Yeah, it's 130. Yeah. So then my reserve, so that's 30 plus, so it's 90. How can that be right? Is that right? Resting plus 60 plus 50%. My reserve is 130. Oh, okay. So it's about similar actually. It's 120. Oh, that's interesting. So it actually, it makes. So actually, people with different resting heart rates can still have similar aerobic thresholds. Yeah. That's that would explain it, because I've got quite a high aerobic threshold, but quite a high resting heart rate.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Finally, the anaerobic threshold. So once we hit 85 to 90% of our reserve plus our resting heart rate, which for me is 176 beats per minute, this is when your muscles start to flood with lactic acid. You can only really sustain above 90% for 5 to 10 minutes before you'll burn out and you'll start to cramp, basically.
Yeah. Start to cramp. Yeah, nice. I like it. That's cool. Okay.
This is just a demographic.
So you just get an idea of these heart rates. Okay.
Cool, so some example programming. So all this is taken from Chris Hinshaw's Instagram, at Aerobic Capacity.
Thanks, Chris.
Firstly, Chris prescribes 2 different ways of looking at programming. He does distance and he does time. So these 2 workouts are the same. All the difference is that this is, the way we're measuring it is in 90 seconds, 75 seconds and 60 seconds quantities.
What was programming 1? Okay, so 300 meters far past.
Is in meters, so we're doing...
Is this rowing?
No, this is running.
Running?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
So fast pace, 100 meter recovery.
300 meters, for someone who's sort of like a regular CrossFitter who's got good running mechanics, should probably take...
minute? 300 meters?
At a fast pace, yeah. So
under a minute?
Yeah, under a minute. It's sort of like your 400 meter time for 300 meters, really.
Yeah.
So a fit person should be able to do a 400 meter run in about a minute. Slowly getting faster, especially again if you're a good runner. You've got good running mechanics, you'll build up a runner, you might be a bit faster. The idea is that we're slowly increasing the pace of this run. So this is all. One of the most important things with this is that you listen to your body. So you'll get better at this. The more you do the programming, the better you'll get at knowing how hard you're pushing yourself. So the idea is that when we get to our final 300 meter fastest pace, we're working at what would be a 300 meter sprint. So we're looking at like 30 to 40 seconds at that point. The idea
or whatever you can manage. Actually,
Yeah.
no, it's God, that's really interesting, isn't it? So that's quite a tough. So how long is each set? So it's going to be what, 4 minutes?
Yeah, and then 3-minute rest between sets.
Okay.
So it's not a one-to-one work rest rate.
No.
Because the idea is that we're slowly beginning to flood our muscles with more and more lactate.
Okay, so we're trying to challenge the lactic threshold. Yeah. Okay.
We're just slowly stringing out our lactate threshold, stressing it. Think of it as like stressing your threshold. Try and get it to push out and get it closer to our VO2 max.
Okay, that's cool.
Exactly the same for this workout, but this time we're doing it in seconds, so we have a 90-second fast
Yeah, very,
pace,
very similar.
1 minute recovery. This is much more accessible if you don't have a running track. If you're just doing runs up and down the road.
Yeah, I like that one more because you're doing it off a time. It's a time priority rather than a task priority.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. That's wicked. Okay.
Okay.
Another one.
This is just this is a different workout. This is called faster row row row. So
Faster row row row.
you pick a fast. Again, this is done in the meters. I think this one doesn't really have a time option. I can check, but a 200 meter fast run, and then it's done in 2-minute intervals. So it's like an EMOM but a 2-mon. So you're doing 200 meters fast and then running easy. So just easy enough that you can let your legs drain of lactic acid, let your heart rate begin to drop again. And then as soon as you hit 2 minutes, it's another 200 meter run, but faster. So just maybe creeping it up. Say your first run was done at 75%, creeping that up to what you feel like would be closer to 80. And we're pushing faster until we're hitting as close as possible to sort of like 100% sprint. 200 meters is a pretty nasty distance.
It's hard, isn't it, to understand? So to really do that perfectly, faster. Because by that faster, still, you've got to be really, really aware of how your body is, isn't it?
That's one other thing that Hinshaw talks about. He talks about the idea of developing gears, like the link between your mental and your muscle, so the mind-muscle link. One of the things that he talks about is gears. Like imagine gears on a bike. You know how hard you're pushing because you can click down the gears or up the gears.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with running. The more you do it, the more you do this kind of programming, the more you'll understand which gear you're in. So the idea is that you'll be able to sit in a certain gear, a low gear at the start, and then you begin to just click through the gears, click, until you're working at your hardest rate.
Your fastest pace. Yeah, so that's like fast is like 5th gear. If you've got a 9-speed bike, 5th gear, 6th, 7th, 8th, and then 9th on the final one.
Cool.
Boom, boom, boom. I like it. It's awesome. Okay, that's fascinating.
Okay, so just a couple of main points to wrap up, really. So we train our aerobic capacity with 3 different metabolic pathways: the oxidative, the lactate or glycolytic, and the phosphogen or phosphocreatine pathway. A lot of this work is done using the sort of like the distances and the times of work that correspond to the lactate threshold, because what we're trying to do is just get people's lactate thresholds higher. One thing that this is quite specific to endurance-specific athletes like cyclists and runners, earlier on in their season they do sort of slow and low runs, which is when you're just running just above your aerobic threshold for a long period of time. And what this is doing is it's training and recruiting your mitochondria to work as efficiently as possible.
So how much of it as a percentage would you be working just over your threshold, like your aerobic threshold? Would it be like, so you'd be like 124, you'd be operating on like 130?
Yeah, so
really low heart rate.
Just long runs or long cycles of your cycles.
That's interesting.
This is very specific to endurance athletes.
Yeah.
As CrossFitters, we don't do this. It's not in our methodology.
No.
We might sometimes be, if you follow .com programming, occasionally a 10k run might come up.
Yeah.
This is still not something that we'd be used to doing. So for the average CrossFitter, we just benefit from introducing some specific aerobic capacity training sessions every now and then. So things like here at CrossFit Chichester, we've done Every now and then we get workouts like 10 rounds of a 200 meter row or a 200 meter sprint. This
with a 30-second rest or something with
so
90-second rest.
That's lactate. That's
yeah, it's all lactate threshold, isn't it?
It's just lactate threshold work.
Yeah.
And that is just less advanced capacity training. It still gives you the exact same stimulus. It's kind of different because it's not progressive overloading until you're super maximal above your threshold. You're always above your threshold in the same way. So it's slightly less complicated, but it's giving you exactly the same benefit of just slowly stringing out your lactate threshold.
It's cool. Is that's it?
it.
References. Oh, excellent.
So
Well done. So he's got aerobic capacity, Moses Medical Dictionary, Brooks physiologic responses and long-term adaptation to exercise.
and then
Good man. Where did you find this? You got books, you got access to it in the CrossFit Level 1 training guide.
And then
of course.
we're missing aerobic capacity website and Chris Instagram.
Oh, okay. And Chris Inshaw's Instagram, which is probably the most important one.
Yeah, that's where I got all my programming.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. That was amazing.